how many chefs have sat down and thought, how can I create a vegan dish that's attractive to everybody, including my non-vegan customers? Well, do the same thing. How can I make something that's attractive to those with the key food allergies that is also attractive to other people?
Hello and welcome back to Bailiwick Podcasts. I'm Oliver Hall and today I'm talking to Dominic Jones for the interview. We're talking about all things food allergies in the hospitality industry in Jersey. In the United Kingdom, laws were introduced in 2014 with regards to food allergies, as they were across the European Union. Those laws were updated even further in 2021 with Natasha's Law. In Jersey, though, there is no concrete legislation. In this interview, you'll hear me talk to Dominic about that, about the awareness crisis we have in the hospitality industry with regard to food allergies, and about the opportunities that businesses and chefs alike have to really exploit this part of the market. Enjoy. Hello everyone and welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Dominic Jones, CEO of JP Restaurants, and we're going to be talking today about food allergies and how laws here in Jersey are very different to those in the UK and the European Union and much of the world, and what we can do to change that and why that is the case. So I just sort of want to pass over to you, Dominic, to kick things off and sort of introduce, if you could, to start, outline what the laws are in the UK, what they are in Jersey, and what those really key differences are.
Yeah. Okay. So if we look, perhaps the best place to start is with the UK and the EU and then go back to Jersey to show what we haven't got rather than what it is here, because there really isn't much of a law here at all.
No, there's almost nothing.
There is, exactly. So the UK and the EU brought in food allergen laws about 10 years ago, and they were focused primarily on labelling key allergens right the way through the food supply chain. So that was from manufacturing and retail through to the restaurants, and then labelling for pre-packaged goods and communication of allergens for food that you eat in a restaurant or a cafe or a takeout environment.
So they identify as pre-packed for direct sale and loose food. Is
That's
that right?
Yeah, exactly. So if we just look at it in the hospitality environment, because obviously there are different rules for wholesalers and others, and maybe we'll come on to that because that's all part of the supply chain for restaurants. But in effect, where you've got pre-packaged for direct sale, you have a requirement to label now any of the key 14 allergens. And then you also have in restaurants an obligation to communicate that food allergen information is available. And you either provide that by means of an allergen menu, which people will be used to seeing, or it will be provided orally, directly from the customer. Now, that base law is then moved forward with the Food Standards Agency, who have rules and best practice for dealing with allergens, and they will look at things like, how you deal with precautionary messaging like may contain, which is a whole minefield for people, and of course can create quite a lot of can make it very uninclusive, if you like, because if you just put may contain on everything, then it's not really helping those with food allergies, which is the purpose. And then you've got also just the Food Standards Agency has just brought out a new recommendation, which is to do with, just like with the prepackaged for direct sale that came from the Natasha's Foundation,
in 2021, right?
From 2021, we then have moved on to Owen's Law. Owen was a young man whose parents who died after eating a burger, chicken burger, contaminated with undisclosed milk protein, and his family are trying to require written allergen menus for all hospitality. So not just, you can find out information about allergies, please let us know if you've got food allergies, but actually you need a written menu with the 14 key allergens indicated on a matrix against each dish.
I think most people will probably be familiar with seeing that in a lot of settings, right? And I think even here in Jersey, I suppose, because a lot of food comes from the UK, people will be familiar with the bold writing you get on the back of packages that came out of Natasha's Law in 2021. But I mean, what I've found fascinating coming back over from the UK recently to Jersey, and sort of completely baffling when you told me about this over lunch the other day, is that in Jersey there's advice, but there is no allergy law. Really, no,
there isn't. So what we've got here is we've got the environmental health like we have in the UK, that are looking generally at food safety. And listeners will have seen those 5 stars in the UK and in Jersey, indicating the food safety rating of an outlet. And allergens and allergen processes are part of that. So you're unlikely to get a 5-star rating unless you have some sort of allergen process in place. But there's no actual law requiring you to either indicate those allergens or to communicate it at all. So there's really a sort of lack of awareness, I think. What we do have here, and where there have been prosecutions in Jersey, like they have in the UK, is that under the general food law, there's a requirement to, in effect, serve what it is that it's a sort of trade misdescription. So if you go in and say to somebody, I'm allergic to peanuts, and they serve you a dish with peanuts in it, then that is a criminal offence. But it's really at the very base level. It'd be the same thing if it had cyanide in it or was unfit food, etc.
Law against food misrepresentation, they put it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just sort of completely baffled as to why. I mean, routinely throughout the past few years especially, I mean, as you say, it's been more than a decade since these laws were brought in across the EU and subsequently in the UK.
Yeah.
Then another 3 years since Natasha's law in 2021.
Yeah.
And Jersey politicians have promised for years to bring this stuff in. Why has that not happened?
Well, I think we're a small island jurisdiction, and legislation and the drafting of laws takes time. And I think COVID got in the way a little bit, but really it's to do with priorities. And for whatever reason here, it's not considered a priority. One of the things that I've always said, and it's a shock tactic really, but we know, like with Natasha's law and with Owen's law, which is going through the process now, is being recommended to the UK government, that once you have deaths, then law tends to change. So I don't see why do you have to wait for a death in Jersey for that to happen?
Yeah, it's an insane perspective to take. But because I mean, you're right. As soon as if there were a tragedy and a death, right, this would change instantly overnight. But is there really no pressure on lawmakers here to make that change?
So there's not. In fact, there's the opposite. There's actually quite a strong lobby from hospitality industry, from some areas of the hospitality industry. I mean, there are many here in the island who really do a very good job. But of course, because there's not a legal framework, you're not sure of the baseline that really there's sort of implementing against, if you like. Yeah. But but there is a small minority here, and more than a very small minority, who actively lobby against it. And that is really a question, I think, of education. Understandably, if you feel that you're being required to disclose information that could result in you making a mistake and therefore killing somebody and committing a criminal offence, people get very defensive. They get nervous, and you start seeing, like you do in restaurants in Jersey, statements like, if your allergies are so severe that you may die from eating an allergen, please do not dine in our restaurant. Now, you would never see that in the United States, in the UK now, because there is a positive requirement to deliver that information.
Sure, yeah.
So,
and also you don't know how severe your reaction is going to be, right? I mean,
well, no, that comes on. I mean, maybe we'll come on to that,
but
I mean, that's another question of education: is people understanding allergies, understanding the difference between true food allergies, intolerances, and celiac disease. They're all and dietary choices are all very different. But from a restaurateur's perspective, when there's not the education and understanding, they all get lumped in together, and you get those cases which they don't understand, where you will get somebody coming in who has a proper IgE-mediated food allergy, who could die from a small exposure of an allergen, right down to the other end to people who say they have an intolerance at the beginning of the meal, and then at the end, when they've had a few drinks, they go, "Oh, what's the apple tart got in it? Oh, has it only got a little bit of almond? Oh, that's fine, I'll have it then." And of course, the restaurateurs are seeing that, and they're thinking, "Oh, these people are just difficult. They're just difficult customers," which they're not. You know, people with food allergies are definitely not difficult customers. In fact, quite the opposite. I think anybody with a food allergy who goes into a restaurant where people are caring about it. So I think there's a lack of understanding. There's pressure against it, and ultimately, it's like you know, in many Western jurisdictions now, there is this whole backlash against red tape. You know, and there is red tape that causes problems, and this is seen as yet just more red tape. But actually, I would argue that it creates opportunities as well. We have a big visitor economy here. People aren't going to come on holiday. In fact, Natasha's father recently on a news interview with ITN and ITV News specifically said that those people with food allergies should not travel to Jersey on holiday because of the lack of legislation. So that's the sort of PR that you get if you don't have it in place.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It gets sort of thrown in with like having to have single-sex toilets as like a, as you say, another piece of red tape. And I think what's really interesting to me is, especially when you see that, like you were saying, some menus here will say, if you have such severe a food allergy, please don't dine with us. I mean, it's actually really a case of discrimination. I mean, against a huge group of society, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how much, can you give us an idea of what percentage of people will have a food allergy?
Yeah. So around 5 to 8% of the population have what's called an IgE-mediated food allergy. That is a true food allergy that triggers a reaction in the immune system inside the body. You then have up to 20% that have food intolerances. That is not a true food allergy, but is a sort of chemical reaction in the digestive system that makes you feel unwell, but is not going to lead to the severe symptoms that you can have from food allergy, which include, hives, asthma and wheezing, low blood pressure, and in the worst case, anaphylaxis, which you can die from. You then have celiac disease. They're around, if you look at in the UK population, put that into numbers, about 2 to 3 million people have food allergies. You've then got 20% of the population with food intolerances, often self-diagnosed or self-declared, and then you have around 600,000 people with celiac disease. Now, celiac disease is an immune response to gluten in the digestive tract, but again, doesn't cause anaphylaxis. So it causes very unpleasant symptoms. Some of them are similar to those you might get from food allergies, but you're not going to die from it.
Okay, so you actually can't die from celiac disease?
You cannot die from celiac disease.
I didn't know. That's interesting. And as you say, I mean, you've done a lot of work on this, and you're working on a paper at the moment in this area. I mean, what are the steps that you think, not just here in Jersey, because obviously there's need for a legal framework here, that places could be taking and governments should be taking to move forward awareness of this?
Well, I think, if you look at the UK, for instance, and Ireland, so Ireland already has, there were the base EU regulations, which in effect pre-Brexit, but still formed the basis to the UK regulations. And they are similar in the US as well in some states, not on a federal basis. But in Ireland, you've got already laws for allergen medicine hospitality. So with like the Owen's law that's coming in the UK. So I think the UK is pretty good when it comes to legislation. I think I'd like to see Owen's law in place so that every restaurant and cafe has an allergen menu. But it's really about the implementation. So in Jersey, I'd like to see us come up to speed. And in fact, there's a very good argument that Jersey shouldn't go it alone. One of the reasons why you want jurisdictions to coordinate across the world on allergens and why the World Health Organization are doing that is because if you look at the supply chain, you want the same rules and regulations in place. Because if you're getting a package of food with labeling from, being imported from Africa, you want to see that can work through to the labelling and the key allergens. So at the moment, there are 14 key allergens. As you mentioned, I'm involved in this. I'm working with the NICE, the National Institute of Care and Health Excellence in the UK. They're looking at emerging allergens now. So one of the challenges we have is that when people are avoiding things like nuts and other common allergens, there are new ones like pea protein and other novel foods that are starting to cause allergies.
Is that as a result of ultra processed food that these days there are so many more people with food allergies, it appears, or is that we're just more aware of people with food allergies? Okay,
so come on to that quickly, and then I'm going to finish answer your question about what the UK needs to do, because I think it's important, the positive side, if you like. So with respect to growing food allergens, yes, when you hear that quite often from somebody my age maybe, a more middle-aged restaurateur will say, in my day, nobody had food allergies. And they're absolutely right. They didn't. Now, that's not because we've all become woke and soft and etc. It's because the food allergies are growing because of environmental factors playing on already genetic traits that we had. So there is a lot of research. If they could find the absolute source of this, maybe researchers could address it. But it is linked to, I'm just reading a study that's come out in the US, use of drugs like antimicrobials or antibiotics and even proton pump inhibitors, so things for antacid in children, etc., which is affecting the gut microbiome, which is then impacting the immune response to food. And all food allergies go through the way you acquire them is you have sensitization first, which comes through the skin.
So that's like a physical.
So you'll have eczema. Typically, you'll have something like you will suffer from eczema and dry skin. You'll then have peanut dust or soya will be absorbed through your skin. Your body will then think, this is something I don't recognize. Your immune system will fire up. Nothing happens, but the next time you're exposed through oral, through eating it, your immune system goes into overdrive, and that's what causes the symptoms and the anaphylaxis. Now, I'm not a medical expert, but I think it's good to understand what it is and why this is happening, and it absolutely is growing amongst children. And then you've got different dynamics in it. So many more children have food allergies than adults, and the reason for that is that if you look across the different 14 key allergens at the moment, and people are allergic to many more than that, but about 30% are either tree nut or peanut related. And then you have milk and dairy, which are very dairy, milk, and eggs, which are very common when children are younger. But 80% of children will grow out of a milk and an egg allergy, whereas only 20% will grow out of peanut allergy. So as you move forward into adulthood, you're getting fewer than you have with children, but you're still getting a growing amount, but a slower growing. The other interesting thing is in terms of you can acquire food allergies at any age, and the most common one that people are actually acquiring now as adults is seafood allergies. And that's maybe because they didn't eat them when they were younger. So seafood allergy is coming on quite a lot for oysters, shellfish and those sorts of things.
I think anecdotally you hear a lot of people who are now celiac who weren't. I think I've certainly heard a lot of people, maybe of the demographic that you were describing, say, everyone now is gluten-free. And it's sort of this idea that basically loads of people went keto 10 years ago and now everyone wants to do away with that and is calling themselves celiac. But
so that is, maybe that segues on to answering the last part of your question about how you make the difference. So just to answer that question, celiac disease is something which you can diagnose. You can take a biopsy, you can see whether somebody is celiac disease. But gluten intolerance is something separate from celiac disease, and so you get people who eat gluten-free diets because they think it doesn't make them bloat or they don't feel right on it, and there are lots of people with intolerances. We all know there are foods that don't make us feel good or make us feel better, and we all metabolize and deal with things differently, so that's probably the case. Celiac disease you can diagnose. Food allergies, again, you can diagnose it through a blood test to see that you've got to see that you have an allergy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will react at all. So, in fact, diagnosis of food allergy is quite complex and has to be done by an allergist. It's not something you can do by sending off your blood to even the best lab in the world. They won't do it. It's a much more complex issue. It's not time to go into this now, but I'm sure listeners could look into that. So, when you asked me the question about what is happening in the UK that could be done in Jersey, so we want to follow in Jersey the legislation I think that's elsewhere, but it's how you then implement that. What do you put? Do you put a disclaimer on your menu saying here's the allergen menu, but by the way there's big black letters saying you eat at your own risk. We cannot guarantee that food is free of all allergens, or do you turn it on its head and put we welcome people with food allergies because actually you understand that if you understand the law, you're not going to get locked up just because somebody eats an allergen in your restaurant and they die. You're going to get locked up if you haven't got the processes and the education and the training and the thought process behind what you're doing. So it's a negligence type test, if you like.
As far as I see it, the training is almost as important as the law itself, right? I've worked in a few places in the UK, and even sort of in the last 5 years since I first started working in hospitality to now, every 6 months you have to, it feels like a massive pain when you're doing it. You have to do these online training for allergies and this, you've got to use this colour tong for that and this and that. And then, I've only been back in Jersey for a week, but when I've eaten here, and been into place. I went into one cafe the other day and they had peanut M&Ms just out on the counter. I know that if that was me in the UK where I work, I would have been sacked.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a very good point because again, if you're looking at best practice, and maybe we'll come on to this, you need to be looking at, so you need to look at how you welcome them, how you become inclusive. You talked about the issue of disability. I find it extraordinary that you would never say or put up barriers to stop somebody in a wheelchair coming to your restaurant. Everybody would deem that to be unacceptable. But somehow it's acceptable to put wording on a menu, even in the UK, that would make somebody who had food allergies not come in, not make them feel welcome in that restaurant.
You wouldn't say if there's a chance you're going to have a seizure because you've got epilepsy, you're not welcome in the restaurant, would you? It's insane.
And actually, I mean, in under employment law in the workplace now, food allergies are a disability. So you have to. So workplaces have to make accommodation. They have to accommodate people with food allergies. So if you were hot desking, for instance, you might want to ban nuts if there was somebody with a nut allergy, because the person using the desk before might be using nuts, or you might have enhanced cleaning, etc. That hasn't moved into the hospitality space yet under the Disability Act. So I think it's there to be tested. I think it'll come, but it's not the case.
And how do you increase awareness? Because I saw Will and Good us sitting here saying, increase awareness, and it's great that we talk about it on podcasts like this, and that's one way to do it. But I mean, what else can be done? Is it a case of public awareness campaigns? Is it, as I say, through training of staff? I mean, what are the steps?
Well, look, I think in Jersey, if you have a law, of course, that raises awareness. I've just been down on holiday with I have a family member who suffers from food allergy, just been on holiday to Spain, and even the small little coffee shops have menus up with symbols, and you see everything. So Spain is very good, probably the best in Europe, actually. The Italians and French are good because they know what's in their food, so you tend to talk to them, but they're not quite so good on labelling outside the bigger organisations. But I think it's a two-way. Education is really important, but as we looked at, and as I started living with a family member with food allergies, and then looking at our own businesses where we had near misses and we thought we had best practice, I realised that you can't just say it's training, and you can't just say I'm going to discipline that person because they're not doing what they're supposed to. You've got to make it easier. So there are ways of looking at your whole, just like with HAZAP for food safety, where you have critical control points, you need to employ the same process for food allergy. And now it's all sounding very sort of technical and corporate. It's not what you want, and it's behind the scenes, but it helps. So you mentioned the tongs, for instance. So really important. Another one, if you're a barista, for instance, and you've got a milk jug and an almond milk jug, and even the rags that you're wiping them down with, because you're heating the milk and you've got to wipe it down. You've got to think about what you do with the almond milk and how you don't cross-contaminate, etc. There are other ways you can do it. You can look at your cooking processes. I think when we briefly met and we were chatting about this before, I mentioned the situation of where we would have food cooked on the plancha, for instance, fish, meat, and we would keep, fish to one side and meat to the other because of the taste contamination, if you like. And we had a halloumi dish that was cooked on the plancha. Now, rather than saying if somebody has a dairy allergy, that what we would do is we would cook their fish and meat in a separate pan, we just decided, since we only had one dish that was dairy related, one ingredient cooked on the plancha that was halloumi, we took that off the plancha, and every halloumi dish that anybody ordered was cooked in a pan. What that means is the chefs don't have to think that the process is helping. Well, it's not they don't have to think, but it's helping them, that you're reducing the number of exceptions. And
you can be tired, and people, as I say, it's not malicious.
No.
The idea is that you put in processes in place, right, so that it is just a step-by-step thing that becomes second nature.
It makes it easier. And actually that is happening across the UK. We have, and this will need some explanation, but we do not have any nuts, tree nuts or peanuts in any of our restaurants, right? And it's the same in the UK. Wagamamas have done the same. Lots of big Pizza Express. There are lots of big chains that don't have nuts. Now, that doesn't mean that nuts are... And you often see nuts on the end of menus, and it gives this idea that nuts are somehow more dangerous than milk or eggs. They're not. If you have a severe egg allergy or milk or dairy allergy, you're going to suffer the same consequent effects as you would do with nuts. The difference with nuts, though, is that if you look at the number of people who are allergic to them, there are, say, 50, when they looked at because we track all the allergens that are disclosed in our business, it's about 15-16% peanuts, about 17% tree nuts, 16% peanuts, and so about 30% overall. By taking those out, we're reducing our risk already, but it's something unlike milk, which is ubiquitous in the Western diet, that you don't really miss in a restaurant. Sure. And I think that's also, nuts get chucked around. They're loose, they're different. So those sorts of things can make a difference. And we've even gone through to how we sort of we have a sort of risk scoring for menu developments. Again, that is helping this holistic approach to allergens. And the key part of this is that whilst it all sounds very complex and difficult, is that you get to a situation where the end customer, those people without allergies, don't notice. Yeah. That your team don't notice, in the sense that you've got a processor, but you're really making it a lot safer for that 5% of people that have food allergies. And remember, of course, that 5% is usually accompanied by at least a partner. So that's 10% of your revenues, and sometimes a family member and friends. So that could be a lot more. My family member who's a young child with a food allergy, Pizza Express is the go-to for her class now. Yeah. Because in Jersey, they know that those with food allergies are going to be safe there. So that is driving revenue. So it's an opportunity as well as a challenge, which I think people don't necessarily see.
Yeah, that's what I sort of wanted to finish on, really. Is at what point does this go from being... So a lot of businesses, as you say, like Wagman was taking out peanuts, and actually, like we were saying earlier, it always happens after a death or after a severe incident. Yeah. At what point does it go from being businesses covering their backs to businesses looking to create new opportunities and exciting avenues for them to go down? And how do you think businesses can be doing that? Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's very much like normal disability. We've gone through the whole thing of hidden disabilities, and now with the sunflower lanyard that you see, the accommodation that's made in shops with quiet shopping evenings, and people see that not just as the right thing to do, but as an opportunity to bring customers in. And I think the same thing will happen in hospitality. People will realise what is happening, of course, is that over the last 10 years, that growth has been amongst children, because you generally acquire a food allergy when you're a child. You don't get rid of it. But of course, those children and their parents aren't necessarily the children aren't the spenders. And as that grows, people will see that then becomes an opportunity. And already, we're seeing it, Cadbury's chocolate, wrappers, little by little, you're seeing nuts and you're seeing allergen labeling and may contain statements. I mean, one of the worst things you have in allergy is these precautionary labels, because
packaged in the same
factory as. What does it mean? There are all these challenges. They don't help people access and find it easy to find themselves feeling inclusive, whether they're shopping or in a restaurant, etc. So absolutely, those sorts of things are starting to change.
The one, I know I said it was the final thing, but I have one other point that's just come to mind, is cost, right? And I think this is especially for the case with gluten-free people, is that these things, when they're on menus, often an allergy-free, especially, as I say, with gluten, a gluten-free pizza base will be £3 more, or this X more. How do you get that cost down for businesses? Is it a case of just everything becoming allergen-free, so you're buying in bulk and that's why it's cheaper? Are there ways to rework menus? I mean, is there a solution to that problem? Because I think that's what a lot of businesses are afraid of, is just adding different options is inherently more cost, right?
I don't think it is. I think it is when you start tinkering around the edges of a menu. Yeah. But once you look at it holistically across the whole thing, then actually all of these ingredients that people are allergic to are normal ingredients elsewhere. So, I could give you a good example would be, when we first started doing allergen menus, we found that the vegetable oil that we were using to cook had soya in it, right? And so every single dish that was either fried or had dressing or something else was ticked with soya. And of course, you look at it and somebody with a soya allergy can't eat that. Now, on the one hand, we can then start saying, well, how can we choose some dishes that don't have soya on it as part of the recipe design process? So don't just treat the allergen thing as a tick box exercise after the process. Bring it right into the recipe development. So just as you would say, how many gluten-free dishes have we got? How many dairy-free dishes have we got? How many vegan or vegetarian dishes? Whilst allergies need to be kept very separate from dietary choices, you use it as part of the menu development process when you're choosing a menu. So you've got a wide variety to. So I think that's the main thing. And then the other thing, of course, is you will find that these vegetable oils, when you keep the ones without soya, are being sold more, and you find that manufacturers start to change because
costs come down.
That can have its own problem. I mean, we're now seeing, if we're looking at the cafes that we run, we're seeing, snack bars coming in saying free from the 14 key allergens, because manufacturers are seeing that as a real opportunity. But what they're now is happening is they're packing them full of pea protein and other things. And some of these ultra-processed foods are some of the most dangerous for people with allergies because they have hidden. So faux foods, vegan ice cream has cashew butter in it often and things like that. And so those things are dangerous because they, again, if you've got all your control points for allergies, the last one might be that the customer actually looks at the dish and goes, I can't eat that because it's got milk in it, it's got nuts in it. Whereas if you get given some vanilla ice cream that looks like vanilla ice cream, you're not necessarily going to think it's got nuts in it. So, I mean, that's an important part of the last process that we have in sort of risk scoring a dish is that we will, as an example, we would say that any high risk allergen, one that's more likely to put you into
apparent on the plate,
gets a score, if you like, as a dish, and also whether it's hidden or not. So a very good example of that, if you had a Thai green chicken curry that had shrimp paste in it, we might not allow that in our restaurant because we would say that's high risk because you wouldn't see it. Because even though the customer has flagged it, it's been flagged in the kitchen, the flags come out, so the last control, if it all went wrong, is the customer's not going to see it. But a Thai prawn green curry, we would allow because the prawns, you can see the prawns in it. But we just wouldn't put shrimp paste. We would take shrimp paste out of our green curry, which, to be honest, a lot of people aren't going to notice. But we know it'll make it safe for somebody with a crustacean allergy.
And again, it's just another case of awareness, isn't it? And allowing other people to be aware and being aware yourself.
Yeah, and being creative. I mean, exactly. our business is about being creative.
Which is a joy.
It's another. So, how many chefs have sat down and thought, how can I create a vegan dish that's attractive to everybody, including my non-vegan customers? Well, do the same thing. How can I make something that's attractive to those with the key food allergies that is also attractive to other people? And then you've solved the puzzle, if you like. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Dominic, for the time. Thanks so much again to Dominic for the time, and thank you to you for listening. For more on this story and more news, visit bailiwickexpress.com. I'll see you next time.